That has brought Hunter Biden back to the courthouse as the jury began its deliberations earlier. He went back to the hotel room just down the street here. There he is now, hand in hand with his wife, Melissa Cohen Biden, ready to hear the jury's verdict in his case. The jury was out for about 3 hours total. 1 hour yesterday, 2 hours today. They had no questions for the judge during their deliberations that we have heard of at this point. And so this was a relatively swift verdict on two charges of filling out of lying on a federal form, background check form, when he purchased a Colt .38 special revolver back in 2018. The second charge is lying on the federal registry, which accompanies that form. And the third charge was illegally possessing a firearm, all having to do with his possession of that gun and his purchase of that gun when he was abusing or addicted to drugs. That was the question in this case. Did the jury believe that at the time he bought that gun, he was abusing or addicted to drugs? That is what they will have decided here, and we should hear the verdict pretty shortly.
All right, Terry Moran, I know you're going to go inside the courtroom. Terry, thank you. And Brian, I want to get your take on the timing. What do you make of how quickly the jury came back with this verdict? They deliberated for a little bit yesterday, and now here we are, 11 in the morning on the East Coast, and they already have a verdict.
So no doubt most attorneys would say that a quick verdict often favors the prosecution. I'm not of that mindset. I've had a 33-minute acquittal, so it can really go either way when it comes to time. But I look more to the strength of the closing arguments. And I think in this case, the government had a very strong closing argument, especially if their points reflected that of the jury instructions, where they say they don't have to prove specifically that Hunter Biden was addicted or using drugs on the specific days of October 11th or 12th, to the 23rd, but just that there was a pattern. I think there was enough there to prove the pattern. And so in that sense, I would say a quick verdict, especially with no questions. It didn't seem like they really needed any instructions or any guidance, would lean more in favor for the government. But still, it could go either way.
Brian, one of the last witnesses called was Naomi Biden, Hunter's daughter, and she was called by the defense to talk about how great her father was doing around the time that this gun was purchased. But the prosecution also brought out text messages where she seemed concerned about her father and his addiction. How much do you think that Naomi Biden's testimony contributed to the prosecution's case and the defense here?
I think Naomi Biden's testimony affected the case in its entirety to a large degree, both for the defense and the government. I think for the defense, those initial statements and direct examination of how well he was doing, the ability to testify about his health and the way he was reacting and the way he was acting to specific dates that are in close proximity to the heart of this case helped. But on cross-examination, we saw not only that her text messages, but also through other witnesses, text messages in connection with Hunter Biden really painted a different picture. And I think for a jury that has already said in jury selection, there's a number of them who have been affected by drug abuse or substance abuse in one way, shape, or form throughout their lives, I think it's not hard to reach a conclusion that a father is probably hiding many of his substance abuse issues from his daughter, as I would imagine that most parents would try to hide any personal problems from their children to kind of spare them any kind of heartache. So I think they take her testimony with a grain of salt in many ways.
Hallie Biden was also considered a key witness in this case. She's Beau Biden's widow, was Hunter Biden's romantic partner at the time that he purchased the gun, and is the person who then got rid of the gun. She said she found it and put it in a dumpster that she found because she wanted to get rid of it. How impactful do you think her testimony was, not only related to how she found the gun and how she got rid of it, but their mutual drug use at the time? She admitted on the stand that she, too, was doing crack at the time that they were in this relationship together.
Yeah, she admitted that she was doing crack, but not only that, but that it was Hunter Biden who introduced it to her. I believe at some point, and especially in close proximity to the dates in question as to the purchasing and possession of the firearm, that Hallie Biden, I apologize, said that she was kind of like his confidant, was someone to try to help him keep sober, and was also looking out for him. That she searched that vehicle to make sure that he was okay because she was concerned for him. And if there's anyone who can give insight as to how Hunter Biden was operating and conducting himself in that time that the gun was found, it would be from the person who found the gun, and also her explanation as to why she hid it. So I think in many ways, her testimony very much helped the government in this case. And if Hunter Biden is convicted, I would think that is in large part because of Hallie Biden's testimony.
And Brian, this case centers around the allegation that Hunter Biden knowingly lied about his drug use when he indicated on these federal forms that he was not a drug abuser at the time that he purchased this gun in 2018 and in order to purchase that gun. But he's facing 3 different felony counts here. So can you break down how that action turns into 3 felony counts and how the jury might be able to find him guilty on one count but not another?
Yeah, so the 3 counts break down into 2 of them being about falsification and 1 about possession. And then the 2 falsifications come from the false statement that was made on the document when Hunter Biden requested and purchased that firearm. And then also that document and also anything that Hunter Biden might have said to the federal firearm dealer, that would also be a false statement. And the last one involves the actual possession. An individual who is an addict or possesses a firearm unlawfully, especially after a purchase where they say that they are not an addict, nor are they using. And so that's how those 3 charges break down from a single action of purchasing 1 firearm.
And Brian, let's talk penalties, because if he is convicted, and again, big if here, we have no idea what this verdict is, but if he is convicted, Hunter Biden faces up to 25 years in prison here. What kind of a consequence do you expect, and how much does it matter that he's a first-time nonviolent offender?
So first and foremost, when we talk about 25 years, we're using the max of what each of those charges have or can give an individual, 2 of them having 10 years and 1 having 5 years. But I think what's also important to look at is that none of these charges have a mandatory minimum. And so if convicted, not only does his defense attorney have the ability to argue, as you pointed out, this is a nonviolent crime. Yes, it involves a gun, but it involves the unlawful possession of it, not that he used it unlawfully. This also, at its heart, involves substance abuse, which in many forms is a form of disorder. And so it's not an act of malice or violence, but one of substance abuse that led to false statements and an invalid possession of that firearm. And these are arguments that I think the defense will make to try to pull back away from that 25-year potential sentence and something much closer to under double digits, I would imagine. And there's also, of course, a pre-sentencing report where I think they're going to look at Hunter Biden in a holistic way and suggest that from that report and also the federal guidelines that we're not looking at something at 25 years, but something much lower in terms of jail sentence, if at all.
Brian, several of these jurors either have a connection to someone with addiction or are gun owners themselves. Do you expect that to impact at all how the jury considers some of these things in deliberations and the potential verdict that they've now come back with?
Absolutely. I wholeheartedly think that people's personal opinion and also how substance abuse has affected their families, whether directly or indirectly, and then, of course, the possession of firearms. And I say that because this case, as the government said, is largely circumstantial. And in a case where you see a prosecutor or a government AUSA say, use your common sense to try to prove the case, I think that then asks the jurors to then use their understanding of what an addict is, use their understanding of what addicts do when they're communicating with family members about where they are, if they need a car at 2 a.m. in the morning, if there's residue found in their vehicle or in a pouch. Those things I think are going to bring upon personal feelings from the jurors and say, I think Hunter Biden was recovering. I think Hunter Biden was still using. I think Hunter Biden was hiding his substance abuse from his family because I know these signs because what's happened in my family. And I think a lot of that probably went into the deliberation in this case. And that's why we probably saw about 2 or 3 hours of going back and forth. Ultimately, the question becomes is what they saw in Hunter Biden and what lens they're viewing this case from.
And Brian, the prosecution went out of its way during closing arguments. The prosecutor said this case is not more or less important because of who the defendant is. But how much does it come into play that we're talking about the sitting president's son? This is unprecedented. First time in history we've ever seen a jury have to decide criminal charges for the son of the current president.
Well, I think it comes into play in different aspects of this case, and the judge was absolutely correct that justice, as we often see her portrayed, is blind, and it should not matter who or what that person is in terms of whether they're a Biden, black, white, Christian, Muslim, any race or sexual orientation. It doesn't matter. The facts are the facts, and as this applies. But if we're talking about from a sentencing standpoint, the fact that he is a Biden will have a large play in this because of both the good and the bad that he, and probably in connection his family, has done for that community, or even the fact that he has the open tax fraud case and the bad that might affect him in that sense. And so I think when it comes to the guilt or innocence, what we're trying to figure out now, that doesn't have a big play. But if we move past that to a sentencing stage, that will have more of an impact.
And Brian, in former President Trump's criminal hush money trial, we saw the prosecution bring out excerpts from several of his books. And we saw a similar picture here. The prosecution pulled out quotes from Hunter Biden's own 2021 memoir, where he's talking about his drug abuse. How reliable is information like that as evidence in court, given on the one hand, it's coming, directly from the defendant, in theory, their own words. And it looks like we do have that verdict now. I'm going to take it over to David Muir now.
This is an ABC News special report. Now reporting, David Muir.
Good morning. We're coming on the air because there is breaking news at this hour. A guilty verdict in Hunter Biden's federal gun trial in Wilmington, Delaware. The president's son facing 3 felony counts, accused of lying on a federal form about drug use when he bought a gun in 2018, saying he was not a drug user, and prosecutors arguing he illegally had that gun for 11 days. After deliberating for about an hour on the first day, about 2 hours today, they have found him guilty on all 3 charges. Count 1, making a false statement in the purchase of a firearm. Guilty of count 2, making a false statement related to information required to be kept by a federal licensed firearms dealer. And guilty on count 3, possessing a firearm by a person who is an unlawful user or addicted to a controlled substance. So again, the breaking news at this hour, Hunter Biden found guilty on all 3 felony charges. Let's get right to Terry Moran outside the courthouse. Terry?
That's right, David. You've got it. All 3 counts, guilty as charged. About 3 hours of deliberation. 1 hour yesterday, 2 hours today. The jurors got to work, and they came through with this verdict. Each of these counts required the jurors to take into account what Hunter's defense was here, which was basically that while he had abused drugs, as he confessed in his memoir, Beautiful Things, as the jurors heard plenty of evidence about, at that time, Hunter Biden said since he didn't testify, but his lawyer presented evidence that he did not feel that he was actually abusing drugs at that time and therefore was not guilty of these crimes. The jurors rejected that, guilty on all 3 counts. Hunter Biden arrived in court just before the jury was brought in and read the verdict.
Terry, let me ask you about the show of support in the front rows of that courtroom. As we know, the First Lady, Jill Biden, there supporting her son every day but one in this trial. Multiple members of the family and friends close to Hunter Biden, all there. We know in the closing arguments, the prosecution, well aware of that image right there in front of the jurors, saying of family members, the First Lady, the friends who had gathered, essentially, that does not matter here.
That's exactly what they said, David. None of that matters. Pointing at the Biden family, at the First Lady, who was here almost every day, took a whirlwind trip to France to join the president for the D-Day commemorations, and came right back to be with her son. And yet it was part of the closing argument of prosecutors there. Prosecutors saying no one is above the law, no matter what their name is, no matter who is in court.
And Terry, the defense, Hunter Biden's defense team, had tried to argue in closing arguments that the prosecution, while they had ample evidence that Hunter Biden was a drug user, that the window of time directly surrounding the purchase of the gun, the defense had argued the prosecution had not made the case that he was using drugs in that, that window of time, that very small window of time. But apparently the jury didn't buy that.
They didn't buy it, and in part, David, because of the law that the judge read to them. The judge, as is customary, as is part of the process, reads the jurors the law that they will apply to the facts that they heard in this case. And part of that law was that drug use for the purpose of this law did not have to occur on the day that Hunter Biden bought the weapon and checked that federal form, that it could be evidence of a pattern of drug abuse or drug addiction around that. And that certainly was clear in this case. So the defense was fighting an uphill battle, not only really against the facts, but against the law as the judge gave it to the jurors here. Now, I should say that in court, the defense, as is customary, right after the conviction was announced, renewed an appeal for an acquittal from the judge in order to preserve an appeal, and gave notice essentially that they will appeal this case.
So what happens now, Terry, legally to Hunter Biden?
Sentencing next. And these are very serious federal crimes. These are crimes that carry very heavy prison sentences, 10 years each for the false statement and 5 years for the illegal possession of the weapon. Now, that is highly unlikely to be applied to Hunter Biden, anything like that in this case. Experts tell us that for a first offender like him, someone who did not use the gun at all, he just kind of bought it and stuck it in his car, there's no evidence that he was going to use it in any kind of a crime. It would be highly unlikely for Hunter Biden to see prison time. But these are, as I say, very serious charges, and it may well be that prosecutors will ask for some prison time, given the nature of the charges and given what others might face.
Terry Moran on the breaking news here. Terry, stick with us. We're reporting ABC News live coverage here. Guilty on all 3 counts for Hunter Biden, President Biden's son. Okay. Let's bring in our chief legal analyst, Abrams. Dan, what do you make of this guilty verdict? And you heard Terry lay out the framework there, the potential sentencing that he could face, though unlikely that he would get 25 years behind bars here, is it not?
Yeah, this is not a surprising verdict, David, because as a technical matter, the defense had an uphill battle here, right? The moment that this case was going to trial, it was immediately clear that the defense was going to be in trouble based on the technical crime that we're talking about here. But I think Terry's right that it's still very unlikely that he would serve any prison time. Now, remember, there was initially a plea deal that covered not just tax crimes, which they're going to deal with later at a later date, but this crime. And on this one, the prosecutors, as part of this deal, had agreed not to even prosecute it, meaning not a plea deal, not an agreement that he's conceding to guilt, but an agreement by the prosecutors not to even pursue this case. That's how sort of marginalized this case had initially been. But once that plea deal fell through, the prosecutors threw the book at Hunter Biden. And while it's true that under these facts, with one gun not used in a crime, someone who's not have a criminal record, no other crimes committed, there's never been a case where someone has been prosecuted just for this particular crime with those set of facts. But when a plea deal falls through, it is not unusual that the prosecutors then throw the book at the defendant, and that's exactly what happened here.
And Dan, just again for our audience, what do you gather this sentence could look like here?
I think it's likely that he will not be serving time for this. So I think that, look, the judge will have a lot of discretion here. As Terry made clear, this is, technically a very serious crime with very serious potential sentence. But as a practical matter, because it is the only crime, meaning there weren't other crimes committed with it. Typically, this kind of crime of lying on a federal form is thrown in with other crimes, where a gun is used in a crime. They say, oh, well, there was also falsification made on the federal form to get the gun. We're going to enhance the sentence as a result of that. Here, where you've got an isolated crime, just this, with nothing else, it would be very surprising, I think, if Hunter Biden were to serve time. But, you know, David, one other interesting question. You had asked President Biden in your interview with him whether he would pardon his son, and his answer was no. He'd respect the verdict, et cetera. Remember, there's also the possibility of commuting the sentence. So if there is a sentence that comes down, even if he's not officially pardoned, there's also the possibility of commuting the sentence at some point down the road.
And again, just to Dan, alluding to this interview I did with President Biden in Normandy just a couple of days ago. Dan, thank you. Stick with us here. But just to bring you up to speed at home, if you didn't catch the interview, one of the things I did ask of the president, as Dan mentioned, was, have you ruled out a pardon for your son if convicted? He said yes. I also asked him if he would respect the verdict no matter what the finding was from the jury, and President Biden telling me, yes, he would respect the outcome of this case. I want to bring in Olivia Rubin, our investigative reporter. She was inside the courtroom for much of this case. She was in the courtroom as the verdict was read. Olivia, can you describe what you saw?
Well, the verdict did appear initially, David, to potentially catch Hunter Biden by surprise when they announced the very first guilty, the first of three. He had absolutely no reaction on his face. He did not even move. But by the time they announced the second and third guilty verdict, Hunter appeared to accept the verdict. He was nodding his head along as it was read out, appearing to, acknowledge that he had just been found guilty, nodding along as they were reading it out. And then it sort of turned into a bit of an acceptance potentially from Hunter, who turned and patted his lead attorney, Abby Lowell, on the back. He turned around and immediately shook the hands of his paralegals. And then once the court was ultimately dismissed, it was a very brief reading of that verdict. He went around and hugged his legal team, and then he immediately went behind that barrier to grab a hold of his wife and hug his wife, which, David, I will say was one of the most striking aspects of this trial, was sort of the Biden family dynamic. The First Lady Joe Biden was here nearly every single day. His sister Ashley, his aunt and uncle, the brother and sister of President Joe Biden, Valerie and Jimmy, had been in the courtroom as well. Jimmy was in the courtroom, but actually and again, strikingly, this was one of the times where we saw the least amount of Bidens in the courtroom. Just Jimmy Biden and his wife were in there. It appeared that potentially Valerie Biden was late and potentially missed the reading of the verdict. They sealed off that courtroom, and only after the verdict had been read did she rush down the aisle and go to greet Hunter's wife, Melissa. So some very striking dynamics in there. But again, Hunter sort of nodding along with that verdict.
Olivia, we're looking at pictures right now of First Lady Jill Biden. As you point out, she was there for the trial every day but one. She was not in the courtroom for the verdict?
She was not in the courtroom for the verdict, and I can tell you, David, as I sprinted out of the courtroom to come down to you as it was after wrapped up there, she was heading in just as I was heading out. She was rushing through that lobby, appearing, we don't know if they intended for her to not be here for Valerie, but it certainly does appear as if it's possible that they missed the reading of the verdict. It happened quite quickly from when it came down just after 11. Her clerk, the judge's clerk, came into the courtroom to say that the verdict had been reached, and just moments later, it was being read. And you could kind of almost sort of sense what that verdict was going to be initially when they walked the jury in. Again, something we have talked about before, the jury not looking at Hunter Biden. One of the jurors actually took his seat smiling, which was quite striking to see him smiling right before that verdict was read. But again, Jill Biden not in the courtroom. And again, the least amount of Bidens essentially that we have seen in the courtroom for the reading of the verdict.
First Lady not there for the verdict, though there just about every other day of this trial to show her support. Olivia, thank you for the color inside the courtroom. I'm going to bring in our chief Washington correspondent, Jonathan Karl. John, some shock from Hunter Biden's legal team here, and you've also heard from a very close confidant of Hunter Biden.
Yeah, the one-word response I got from a very close friend of Hunter Biden's is stunned, absolutely stunned. I had spoken to Hunter Biden's, some people in his inner circle in the hours leading up to this. They were confident that he would either be acquitted or there would be a hung jury. They thought that Abby Lowell, Hunter Biden's attorney, had made the case, had created reasonable doubt about whether or not he intentionally lied on that form. had pointed out that there had been no direct testimony that Hunter Biden was using drugs in the immediate days leading up to that gun purchase or for the 11 days that he owned the gun. They thought that this was going to result in acquittal. And I have to tell you, David, this is a trial, although President Biden was never in that courtroom. As you've pointed out, virtually every other member of the Biden family was there. And President Biden was clearly paying very close attention to this. He is incredibly close to his son. They speak virtually every day. And as we know, President Biden had said not long ago, when asked about all of this, all of the legal trouble swirling around Hunter, that his son had done nothing wrong. So while you had asked him and he said that he would respect this jury verdict entirely, that he would not pardon his son, I am sure there are some interesting conversations happening right now inside the Biden family and at the White House. This is a clear blow to President Biden and one that is not simply a political or legal blow, but a deeply personal one. And you should also consider that last summer, Hunter Biden believed, his entire legal team, the president, they all believed that he was on the verge of a plea agreement that would result in absolute immunity, that all of the legal troubles were behind him. Now you see he is going to face sentencing on these very serious charges and an entirely new trial on the tax charges in September. A huge, huge blow to the Biden family.
And in addition to what Hunter Biden now faces potentially with the sentencing now that will come next, John, you alluded to this point. And in interviewing President Biden, he said he would respect the outcome. And regardless of what you think about the president politically, we know we're in very polarized times in this country. What we do know is the president is very close to his son. He talks about this connection, that he is his lone surviving son, talking to him just about every day. And John, there's no question that this will deeply affect this president in the middle of this campaign for a second term.
Yeah, absolutely. You know how deeply hurt President Biden was when he lost his son, Beau, who died of brain cancer. Something that President Biden has said to people close to him when talking about Hunter is, I'll be damned if I'm going to lose another one. He's deeply concerned about his son, Hunter, who went through that terrible drug addiction. That, by the way, I mean, I've read that memoir. I've read every page of Hunter Biden's memoir. It is a very stark portrayal of his own descent into crack addiction. There's no whitewashing. He talks about his incredibly irresponsible, reckless behavior. And here's a live picture. Yes, a live picture of Hunter Biden coming out of the courtroom right now. No doubt, a stunned Hunter Biden.
Live pictures here in Delaware. You can see in the Wilmington courthouse, Hunter Biden leaving court, the First Lady, Jill Biden. It appeared that she was there among the group of people there for that moment, if I'm not mistaken. John Carl talking about the deeply personal connection the Bidens have with their son, given the fact that they lost Beau Biden some years back to brain cancer. John Carl also reporting a shock from a close family friend intimately following this case. And as we knew for several days in that courtroom, the First Lady in the courtroom to support her son, along with his wife, his daughter, friends of the Biden family moments ago. This is Hunter Biden leaving court. And as Terry Moran reported earlier, next up will come the sentencing. Now, he faces, given the seriousness of these crimes, up to 25 years behind bars. Dan Abrams, our chief legal analyst, telling us that is highly unlikely, though. given the fact that he's a first-time offender here. This is a first-time conviction. And given that nothing was done with the actual gun as far as a crime is concerned, other than the jury finding him guilty of lying about drug use when he purchased the gun, he said all of those factors might contribute to an outcome here where he would serve no time or a much smaller amount than what would be allowed in sentencing. I want to bring in our Chief Justice correspondent, Pierre Thomas. Pierre covers, obviously, the Justice Department, the Attorney General at arm's length from this case, but he did allow the U.S. Attorney who brought these charges, the U.S. Attorney who was put in that role during the Trump years, Merrick Garland, going out of his way, if you will, to try to demonstrate to the American people that this is not the Biden administration, this is the Justice Department. There is a separation here, and he allowed this case to move forward once the plea deal fell apart and for the case to be prosecuted.
David, this is an extraordinary moment in the sense of the Justice Department. They prosecuted the president's son. And as you pointed out, the Attorney General allowed a U.S. attorney appointed by former President Trump to pursue the case, made him special counsel, and they did not micromanage the case, but they knew full well the implications of what was going on. This is one of the most stressful things that a Justice Department could do. Again, we're talking about the son of the President of the United States, who's now facing these felony convictions. And David, I must tell you, as part of the team that helped break the story about the initial deal that fell apart, there was a lot of back and forth about whether Hunter Biden was getting a sweetheart deal from DOJ. And DOJ was very sensitive to that notion. But they won't say it out loud, but I think part of what is going on here is DOJ officials will hopefully see this as a sign, that the public will see this as a sign anyway, that DOJ follows the facts and the law without regard to who is subject to those facts and the law. And again, I cannot emphasize to you, this DOJ has been under probably more pressure than any DOJ in modern history. They were investigating the former president who's running for president. They launched and oversaw an investigation involving President Biden himself. And in this third investigation involving President Biden's son, again, DOJ, knowing that they're going to face criticism in this case from the left, there will be some people that said that this was a case that they would not normally bring without any kind of other significant crime attached to it. But DOJ allowed, again, the special counsel to pursue the case in the way that he wanted to, and now a conviction of the president's son.
Guilty on all 3 federal counts. Pierre Thomas, our Chief Justice correspondent. Pierre, thank you. Let's get right over to Rachel Scott. She's live at the White House. Rachel, folks are going to be watching very closely any kind of reaction from the White House, the Biden administration, and of course, President Biden himself. And obviously, Rachel, these cases are vastly different. The case we witnessed a couple of weeks back with the former President Donald Trump, his guilty verdict. Now today, President Biden's son, Hunter Biden, with a guilty verdict in this case. Again, the case is completely different. But one thing politically people will be looking at is the reaction. We know after the Trump verdict, a lot of rhetoric about a rigged system, you know, up against the former president. Those are the words being used by the campaign, the former president himself. And just a couple of days ago, on the other hand, the current president, President Biden, telling me in Normandy that he would respect the outcome and that, yes, he had ruled out a pardon. Now, whether or not that continues moving forward after this verdict, he is Hunter Biden's father, as we all know, but will they continue to try to paint a real contrast here when it comes to respect for the justice system as a whole?
And David, this verdict certainly flies in the face of everything that the former president has been pushing, trying to undermine the legal and the justice system. When we know President Biden has come out very strongly against that. And it was notable that he told you just days ago that he would respect the outcome of this verdict regardless of what happens. We know that is something that the former president has not done after he was found guilty on 34 counts of falsifying business records and that hush money trial there in Manhattan. We know he has tried to undermine the justice system entirely. The White House so far, David, as of now, has not commented, but we know that they are watching this and following it very closely. Just that image of the First Lady walking out of that courtroom hand in hand with Hunter Biden just underscores how close this family is. And the president has not really commented much on this federal investigation. He says that he would not do that, but he did make clear to you that he has completely ruled out the possibility of pardoning his son. In a statement, the White House and the president said that they have boundless support and love for their son, Hunter Biden. We know that the president has talked about how he's been on the straight and narrow, how he's so proud of his son, Hunter, and just the First Lady making, really going through extraordinary efforts to be there to show support for Hunter Biden. We know that she traveled to France only to turn right back around to attend the trial the day that Naomi Biden, the granddaughter, was testifying in this case, and then flew right back to Paris. But so far, David, as of now, the president is here at the White House, but no word yet from the president yet.
Rachel Scott live at the White House. Rachel, thank you. Let's get back to Terry Moran outside that courthouse in Wilmington, Delaware. Terry, an extraordinary scene to watch the First Lady leave that courthouse holding her son's hand.
It really was, David, and it reminds us that for all of the major implications of the first conviction of the child of a president, this trial inside the courtroom, like virtually every criminal trial, was a personal story, a personal tragedy, a family tragedy. The guilty verdicts that the jury has handed down on Hunter Biden were verdicts not just on his conduct under law, but on his collapse into drug addiction and the consequences of it. So many American families understand that, and now the first family has gone through it as well. The political consequences of it, may be tempered by the fact that this is a scourge that has touched so many American families, even the president's.
You bring up a good point, Terry, because addiction has affected so many families in this country in one way or another. And unfortunately, I think what the Hunter Biden defense team has learned and the Biden family has learned here is that that's not what was on trial today, the issue of addiction, because I think that's on that level, many Americans can relate to the tragedy within this family.
That's a great point. And the jurors, too, several of the jurors in voir dire, when they were questioning the potential jurors, they talked about the experience of addiction in their own family. At one point, Hunter Biden kind of nodded as one of the prospective jurors who ended up on the jury talked about how the consequences of addiction for one of her friends was she died from a drug overdose. And you could almost sense in the way he sat there that they'll understand. But there's a flip side to it. People do understand the terrible consequences of addiction, the consequences under law as well. And the jurors here were sworn to do their duty under law, applied the law to the tragic facts in this case, as so many jurors do across the country in cases like this. And Hunter Biden is now a convicted felon.
We know both sides, Terry, helping to select that jury. And I just want to read for the viewers at home watching our breaking coverage here. Hunter Biden found guilty on all 3 felony counts, gun-related charges for lying about when he bought that firearm, about his illegal drug use. Terry, I want to bring you back in on this point because a couple of the jurors, this just gives a background on some of the jurors. And you mentioned this a moment ago, but just here's a little greater detail. One of the jurors, a woman whose sister was convicted about 10 years ago of credit card fraud and drug charges in Delaware, the law catching up with her sister. One male juror's father had been killed in a crime involving a gun. His brother went to jail for possession of a narcotic. Another woman on the panel had a husband who was a gun owner and was formerly in law enforcement. So several members of that jury deeply connected on a number of issues here. And on the one hand, as you point out, Hunter Biden and his team were hoping they might have some, I guess, empathy or compassion, if you will, given their own life experience. But on the other hand, they've all been intimately involved and have watched the law at work within their own families.
Absolutely. And that actually may have worked against Hunter Biden. Anyone, and virtually every American family has been touched in one form or another by addiction. People who they understand that addicts are liars, that they may not have been before the drug addiction, but that's part of the craving, that they'll do anything. They'll lie, they'll commit crimes, they'll do anything. And that may have harmed Hunter Biden in this case. The sense that people have an experience of the wreckage that addiction causes in the character of people. This is a reckoning, really, for that passage of his life. And yet sitting in there, I must say, listening to his own voice, reading his memoir, Yeah, this is from the dark years of his life, but it sounds as if he's gotten his life straight. And that, regardless of what the law has to say about his conduct, is all that his family and those who love him could wish for.
Terry Moran, stay with us here. We're coming up on 15 minutes before noon in the East. For many of you here in the East, your local news is coming up here at noon, and we'll go to your local news when it comes on. We are standing by for potential comment from the prosecution. If that happens in the next 10, 15 minutes or so, we'll bring that to you live. In the meantime, I want to bring back our chief legal analyst, Dan Abrams. And for viewers who are joining us in progress here for our live coverage, just bring us up to speed on what you think potentially Hunter Biden could face here.
So, potentially, theoretically, he could be facing up to 25 years in prison. These are felony charges, unlike the tax charges that he's going to be facing in September, which are misdemeanors. These are felonies. So you're talking about the possibility of serious prison time. But because these were felonies that were committed not in the context of another crime, the fact that he is a first-time offender, the fact that the gun that he was lying for was not used in a crime. All of those things will work in his favor, such that I think most would be surprised if he were to get prison time for this. But remember, there's something else to keep in mind here. With this tax case looming in September, if he is convicted in that case, this conviction could be used against him in the context of sentencing in that case. So let's even assume for a moment he gets no prison time in connection with this case. Then he's convicted in the tax case. At that point, he's a convicted felon. And as a result, that could end up enhancing any possible sentence in connection with the tax crime. So there's a lot to still wait and see what happens here. As you and I were talking about earlier, remember, the president ultimately has the final say on federal crimes. This is a DOJ prosecution. As a result, the president could decide to step in some way, shape, or form after the election, if he were to so choose. That's another thing to keep in mind when thinking about the reality of Hunter Biden ever going to prison.
Quick follow-up for you, Dan, because you make this point that these felonies did not happen in the context of another crime. And that brings up another important question in this case, which is how often have you seen, if at all, a prosecution when it's not in the context of another crime?
Right. So there have been other cases where this crime has been charged alone, but there's never been, I haven't been able to find another case where you've had this set of facts where this crime has been prosecuted, meaning that there was just one gun, that it was not used in another crime, that the person had no criminal record, and there were no other crimes committed in general. Under those sets of facts, I don't think there's been another federal prosecution, which is why, as we talked about earlier, initially, the prosecutors seemed willing to agree not to prosecute this case. But when that plea deal fell through, the book got thrown at Hunter Biden, the tax charges were all filed, this felony gun charge was filed, and there's a very different question of, is there a technical violation of the law versus is this the kind of case that's typically charged? And that is not the technical question is not the one that helps Hunter Biden.
And take us, if you will, into the thought process behind once the plea deal fell apart, not offering a guilty plea here for perhaps a lesser sentence. This was somewhat of a legal gamble in proceeding with the case, going straight to trial, and not offering a guilty plea, months back when this plea deal fell apart.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that they believed they had an arguable defense. As you heard John Carl and some of the others talking about earlier, members of Hunter Biden's team were hoping for an acquittal or a hung jury. They thought they had a real shot at that. And if you think that, then you probably don't want to make a deal to just plead guilty. But I think in the context of this sort of case, that it still will remain unlikely that he'll get prison time. And that typical sort of acceptance of responsibility that would help so much may not be as significant. And by the way, I think that may be the same equation that applies in Donald Trump's hush money case, where typically you would say someone needs to accept responsibility for what they did. And yet, I think in that case and in this case, you're going to see a judge in two separate cases, one federal, one state, that will simply decide the sentence based on the very specifics of this case, the crime that was committed and the context of everything surrounding it. When it comes to judges and sentences, you can't ignore that. There is no metric, right? There is no statistics to use where the judge will literally just sort of evaluate this and that. And then they'll go through the process of saying, here are the mitigating factors, here are the aggravating factors. But in the end, it ends up being a judgment call for the judge.
Dan Abrams with us here. Dan, stick with us as we continue our live coverage here. Hunter Biden, the president's son. This is the first time, and we've witnessed a lot of history together here from this news desk, and this is yet another case of that. First time a president's son found guilty. 3 felony counts, as you've heard Dan Abrams report here, Terry Moran as well. Next up will be the sentencing, though Dan believes, given the circumstances of this case, he will not get anywhere close to the 25 years behind bars he could potentially face here, though entirely up to the judge in this case. Of course, we are in the middle of a presidential campaign. President Biden seeking a second term. Former President Donald Trump hoping to return to the White House. I want to bring in John Carl. And John, regardless again of what people think about either of these two men in this race for president, we are aware of the political arguments in this country. You heard Dan Abrams there talk about, just from a legal standpoint, how rare this kind of prosecution is, given the facts of this case. And now you have a guilty verdict on all 3 counts. Knowing that, and knowing that the argument on the other side against President Biden was that the system was rigged against Donald Trump, even though it was a New York case, not a federal case. We know the facts here, but it would be very hard for that same argument to be applied to this case involving the president's son, given the fact that there are guilty verdicts here now on 3 felony counts, and given what the president told me just days ago, that he would respect the outcome, even in a case involving his son.
I mean, it really blows up the argument that the justice system here is rigged. Dan Abrams essentially made the case that Hunter Biden would be unlikely to be prosecuted at all in this if his last name were Smith. You could make the case that he was prosecuted here because he was a Biden, and there was so much pressure on this special counsel to pursue a case and to show that there is no favoritism whatsoever. It's extraordinary to think about how this case came to be. The investigation ultimately began under President Trump in the during the Trump administration, and President Biden becomes president. He appoints Merrick Garland as the Attorney General, and Merrick Garland allows this investigation to go forward with absolutely no interference, obviously, coming from the White House. This investigation goes forward despite the fact that the President of the United States himself said on the record, "My son did nothing wrong." And yet that president did nothing to interfere with the Justice Department. His Attorney General did nothing to interfere with this investigation. In fact, elevated it to a special counsel. And here you have the president's son now convicted of 3 very serious felonies and facing the very real possibility of jail time. And again, no interference coming from either President Biden's Attorney General or from the White House. It really gets right to this point. You hear over and over again from the Trump campaign, from Donald Trump himself, from Republicans, that the system is rigged, that the system is rigged in such a way as to go after Donald Trump. Well, here you have, yes, Donald Trump was convicted by a local court in New York. Here you have a federal prosecution of the president's son, and a pretty extraordinary one at that.
John, I know that you track interviews, transcripts right along with me during this political campaign, and I did take note of an interaction Donald Trump had in recent days with an interviewer where he talked about addiction and talked about how he has witnessed it himself within his own, friends, family, his lifetime, not from a personal perspective, but witnessed it around him and acknowledged the pain that comes with addiction for so many families.
Yeah, I mean, President Trump's own brother, Fred Trump Jr., battled alcoholism throughout his life and died early as a result. I mean, I saw Donald Trump in the 2016 campaign address the issue of fentanyl addiction, and actually there was an event in Iowa where he showed some real compassion towards a man who got up and talked about how his son had died from an overdose. I mean, this is an issue that affects so many families across the country. Virtually everybody in this country either has a family member or an acquaintance or knows somebody who has struggled with addiction. And as we talked about earlier, Hunter Biden spoke with great candor, has spoken with great candor about his battle with crack addiction, a battle that went through various attempts at rehab, a battle that very nearly cost him his life on several occasions. He's written about it all in kind of searing detail in a book that came out, by the way, just after President Joe Biden was sworn in as president of the United States. This is an issue that affects virtually everybody in this country.
Yeah, and the irony here, John, is that great candor you speak of, those very words, as Terry Moran has reported every night here on World News Tonight, were used against him to make this case in court. The jury listening and convicted him. John, thank you. Guilty on all 3 felony counts. Let's take it back to the White House. Rachel Scott live at the White House. And Rachel, of course, all eyes. No one is forgetting that Hunter Biden's the one directly affected by this. Sentencing comes next for him, but all eyes will be on both President Biden and on Donald Trump as to how they're going to handle this piece of news. They'll certainly be pressed on this today and in the days ahead, what their messaging will be. President Biden telling me in Normandy in recent days he'll respect the outcome of this trial. He'll respect the jury no matter what their verdict would be, was the question. He said yes, and of course guilty on all 3 felony counts. I did ask the president, would you ever pardon your son, Hunter Biden? Have you ruled out a pardon? And he said yes. So what he says moving forward is a big question mark on the campaign trail, how he couches this whole very deeply personal issue within the Biden family. But on a very public stage now with him running for re-election. And of course, how Donald Trump handles this as well. As you heard John say just moments ago, Donald Trump has talked about addiction and the effects he witnessed firsthand within his own family, how he handles this major development on the campaign trail as well. 2 open-ended questions at this hour.
Absolutely, David. And look, on the surface of this, these are 2 entirely different cases between Hunter Biden and former President Donald Trump. But on the basis and that very question of just respect for the legal system, of course, we've heard former President Donald Trump undermine the legal system. David, we are just receiving a statement now from President Biden. This is just coming in. I want to read to you what it says. The president has said in a new statement, as I said last week, I'm the president, but I'm also a dad. Jill and I love our son, and we are so proud of the man he is today. So many families who have loved ones who have battled addiction understand the feeling of pride, seeing someone you love come out on the other side and be so strong and resilient in recovery. As I also said last week, I will accept the outcome of this case and will continue to respect the judicial process as Hunter considers an appeal. Jill and I will always be there for Hunter and the rest of our family with our love and support. Nothing will ever change that. David, this is a new statement from the president reacting to this verdict just moments ago. This just came out. And again, you're already seeing it here, just the sharp contrast between the president and his rival in this election, former President Donald Trump, who has accused the president of weaponizing the judicial system. The president making it clear today he will we absolutely respect the outcome and the verdict in this case, David.
Breaking news coverage here on ABC News right now of Hunter Biden, the president's son. Rachel, thank you. They're live at the White House. The president's son found guilty on all 3 felony charges by a jury in Wilmington, Delaware. As Rachel just reported, the breaking headline right now coming in from the White House, the statement from President Biden himself saying, "I'm the president, but I am also a dad." He talked about being proud of his son having come out on the other side of addiction. He talked about the fact that families across this country can understand that anyone who's been touched by addiction. The president referencing in a way what he told me last week during that interview in Normandy, saying, but we will respect the outcome of the judicial process. He will respect the verdict from that jury. An appeal is now ahead. For many of you, your local news is coming up next. I'll see you for World News Tonight. Good day.
This has been a special report from ABC News.
You are watching continuing coverage after a jury found Hunter Biden guilty on all counts in his felony gun trial. The jury determined that the president's son knowingly lied about his drug use to a federally licensed gun dealer in 2018 and also lied on the application to buy that gun, then illegally possessed the gun for 11 days. This is the first time ever that a sitting president's child has faced criminal charges, and now the first time ever a sitting president's child has been convicted of criminal charges. ABC News senior national correspondent Terry Moran joins me from outside that courthouse in Wilmington, Delaware, along with ABC News legal contributor and former FBI agent Asha Rangappa and host of the 538 Politics podcast, Galen Druk, for more. Asha, I want to just start with your reaction to this verdict and the timing, just 3 hours and 5 minutes of deliberations.
Yes, I don't think that it's that surprising. I mean, this was a pretty straightforward case. The prosecution presented a lot of strong circumstantial evidence, and really there was a very narrow path open for the defense, and it really relied on them crediting this idea that maybe at the very moment that Hunter Biden purchased this gun, he really believed he had beaten his addiction or something. But again, you know, they did have a lot of evidence from before and after that he engaged in a pattern of drug abuse. So this does not seem like a, out of the ordinary result, in my opinion, based on the evidence.
Asha, maximum penalty here is up to 25 years in prison. How do you see the sentencing playing out now that Hunter Biden's been convicted on all 3 counts?
Yes, I think, we see those maximum ends, and that is very unlikely to occur here. It's possible that he'll get some jail time. I mean, unlawful possession of a firearm is a serious charge. It's more serious than the false statements. But, I don't know that it's going to be, maybe longer than a year if he were to get any jail time.
And I want to go to our Terry Moran, who's outside that courthouse. Terry, just a little while ago, we saw First Lady Jill Biden walk out of that courtroom holding Hunter Biden's hand. What's the latest there, and what do you make of the scene as this ended?
Well, this is a no-nonsense judge, Judge Mary Ellen Noreika, who also presided over the collapse of the plea bargain last year that actually led to this trial. She kept this trial moving. She was determined to do so. I'm not quite sure what that means behind me, but and her whole effort was to get the jurors the most efficient trial that she possibly could. And so she went right to this verdict before the First Lady was even in the courtroom. Now, the First Lady, of course, like any other mother of a defendant, has the right to be in the courthouse awaiting verdict. She also is the First Lady and has restrictions around her movement and where she can be. So the judge decided not to wait for her motorcade to get here, and she ran into the courtroom after the verdict was read. But Hunter Biden hugged her and the other members of his family who were here. This has been a family tragedy, as so many criminal trials are, as so many criminal trials involving drugs are. You're essentially looking at the consequences of Hunter Biden's descent into addictions after the death of his brother.
And I want to go to our Rachel Scott with the new statement there from President Biden. Rachel, we know the president's now talking about this case, sounding a lot more like he's speaking in his role as a father than as the president.
Absolutely. And this new statement just underscores how close the president is to his son Hunter and the way in which both he and the First Lady have really stood by Hunter. So I want to read to you in part what this new statement says. As I said last week, I'm the president, but I'm also a dad. Jill and I love our son, and we are so proud of the man he is today. So many families who have loved ones battle addiction understand the feeling of pride, seeing someone you love come out on the other side and be so strong and resilient in recovery. The president here also going on to say, as I also said last week, I will accept the outcome of this case and will continue to respect the judicial process as Hunter considers an appeal. Jill and I will always be there for Hunter and the rest of our family with our love and support. Nothing will ever change that. So that is the reaction just coming in here at the White House from President Biden. Terry Moran has been noting how First Lady Jill Biden has really gone through extraordinary efforts to be there almost every single day inside of that courthouse to show her support for her son Hunter, at one point even flying to France, flying back when Naomi Biden was testifying, only to turn right back around and fly right back to Paris. And so the White House today, from the president, expressing their love and support for Hunter Biden. And most importantly here, Diane, I think just it underscores the contrast and the difference between what we are seeing former President Donald Trump and President Biden do when it comes to respecting the judicial system during this campaign. We're hearing the president, even though this is a guilty verdict of his own son, saying that he respects the outcome of this verdict. Obviously, former President Donald Trump has continued to try to undermine the judicial system, Diane.
And I want to bring in our chief Washington correspondent, Jonathan Karl, because, John, less than 2 weeks ago, we saw history made when former President Trump was convicted in his criminal hush money trial. Now history made again with the current president's son now convicted in this felony gun trial. What do you make of that and the historic significance here?
Well, first of all, it shows justice being meted out on the very powerful. When Donald Trump was convicted in New York, Republicans cried and are still saying that this was a political prosecution, that he was being prosecuted because he was Donald Trump, not because of what he had done. And this was some kind of an effort to get at Donald Trump for political reasons. And here in this case, you heard from the President of the United States himself, from Joe Biden, that he believed his son had done nothing wrong. There are Democrats, particularly in the White House, people close to President Biden and the Biden family, who believe that this case would not have been pursued if Hunter Biden wasn't a Biden, that he was essentially being prosecuted because of his last name. And there's a lot of resentful about people resentful about that. But this prosecution went forward, and you had the son of a president stand trial and be found guilty of 3 very serious felonies and facing the very serious possibility of jail time. I mean, I think there is something of a message to the country that the judicial system, that the system of justice works its will in these 2 very prominent cases, despite the fact that both of these individuals, very different set of circumstances, of course, are as politically connected as you can possibly be in this country.
And I want to go to our chief legal analyst, Dan Abrams, on that, because, Dan, you've talked a bit about this and how unusual these charges were. So what do you make of it now that we have a conviction against Hunter Biden on all 3 counts, when these charges are not related to any other actions with that gun, but rather the purchase and the possession?
Right. So there are 2 separate questions, right? One is the one that the jury answered, which is, was he technically guilty of the crime as it was laid out by the judge? A separate question is, would someone in his position have been charged with this particular crime and face a jury if he weren't Hunter Biden? And both questions can be answered in an intellectually consistent but kind of different way, which is, you can believe that the jury's verdict was correct, that it's very tough to defend against this crime, considering that Hunter Biden was an addict. Now, he said there was questions about at that specific time frame, et cetera, but it was a tough defense. And so, it wasn't surprising when I heard that there was a verdict. I expected that there'd be a guilty verdict. And yes, you can also say that when you look at the facts in this case, and I dug in deep on this, I have not found another case in the United States where someone was charged for these sorts of crimes, where there was only one gun, the gun was not used in a crime, the person had no criminal record, and there were no other charges in connection with this. And so, you know, both can be true at the same time, as I think really may be the case here.
And Pierre, it's interesting. I want to go to our Chief Justice correspondent, Pierre Thomas, because, Pierre, that same question being asked here in the Hunter Biden case, would he face these charges if he wasn't the president's son, was also floated during President Trump's criminal trial. Would he face these charges if he wasn't the former president? And former President Trump has repeatedly blamed the Justice Department for the indictments that he's facing and his conviction in Manhattan, even though the Manhattan DA brought that case, not the Justice Department. But what does this full picture mean now that this same Justice Department that Trump has been accusing has successfully prosecuted President Biden's son? What does it do for those claims, and what does it do in general for public confidence in the Justice Department and the justice system?
Well, Diane, I think the first thing we have to say is that this is a sobering moment. DOJ has successfully prosecuted the son of the President of the United States. Merrick Garland, the Attorney General, authorized a U.S. attorney appointed by former President Trump to pursue the case, allowed him to continue working on the investigation, then made him a special counsel after the plea deal fell through. DOJ, again, they won't say it publicly, but privately, they're hoping that this will show that they pursue the facts and the law without regard to who the person is, who the subject is. Clearly, they've been sensitive in hearing all these claims and accusations of conspiracy involving the Manhattan case, Trump suggesting that the Biden Justice Department was out to get him. All these things, they're sensitive to it, but throughout, they've been maintaining, the AG has specifically been maintaining that his job is to pursue the facts of the law, and they would argue today, on this very sober day, that that's exactly what happened.
And Galen, I want to get your sense of public perception from your info on 538. What is this all doing for the public perception of the Justice Department, the justice system in general, and President Biden?
Yeah, I think the point that Pierre Thomas made is really important here, which is that American trust in governmental institutions in general is quite low. And when it comes to the criminal justice system, according to Gallup, only about 20% of Americans say they have a great deal of faith in the system. So, coming on the heels of former President Trump's conviction, I think that there is some idea that this will maybe measure or moderate any sense that the criminal justice system is specifically after Republicans or specifically after Trump. Of course, in this case, the Department of Justice has prosecuted the son of the current president of the United States. And so in an environment where there is a lack of faith in institutions, this somewhat evening sense, although people may not say it out loud, there is a question whether that will happen. But when it comes to Biden specifically, we see in polling that 2/3 of Americans, roughly, say that this will have no bearing on how they vote in this election. And I think Americans know that this is relatively disconnected from the political questions of the day. So this has to do with drug addiction and the purchase of a firearm. You know, I was looking into some data earlier today. According to a recent KFF poll, 2/3 of Americans, 66%, say they have personal experience with either drug or alcohol addiction. So it's not a far leap to understand that there is a sensitive dynamic here. There's a father with a relationship with a son who's facing drug or alcohol addiction. And so this is probably getting filtered somewhat through those own personal experiences that Americans have. And so, you know, I should also say here that when we were talking about that case, the former President Trump's case in Manhattan, the majority of Americans said that they were paying little or no attention to that case. So it didn't really break through until the verdict came in. And then we saw a little bit of movement in the polls, but only 1 or 2 points. So for this situation, it's the president's son. I would imagine that a lot of Americans are only tuning in now. But I think it would be a far stretch to make the case that this will actually move polls when it comes to perceptions of Joe Biden, because by and large, In this situation, Biden is being asked to portray himself as the father of a former drug addict.
And Dan, I don't want to keep paralleling these cases because I understand that they're different, but there is one more similarity that stuck out to me, and that was the book excerpts. In both former President Trump's case and here in Hunter Biden's case, they pulled out excerpts from their own book. In this case, from Hunter Biden's memoir, where he talks about his drug use. How strong do you think that evidence was, and do you think he would be convicted today if he hadn't written that book or not written that in the book?
Hadn't said this in the book, a much harder case, very different from the Trump case in that regard. In the Trump case, the book was really not that relevant to the ultimate question. Here, the ultimate question is, was he a drug user at the time? Was he an addict at the time? And he was admitting that he was an addict and a drug user. And the question, of course, became exactly what was the time frame. But his words were used against him. And again, it wasn't just words on a page. It was his words in the audiobook. It was hearing his voice talk about it. And so obviously, when he wrote that book and did the audiobook, he wasn't thinking that there was a real possibility that he would get charged in connection with the gun possession, or really, I think, with almost any of this. Although I will say, let's remember, one thing I think that's critical that we talk about is the fact that there's another Hunter Biden trial coming in September. And yes, it's true that I don't think this one's going to have much of an impact on the public debate. I also am not certain it's going to change the narrative of some about the DOJ. But the tax trial is scheduled right now for September. Now, in that one, you're not talking about just checking a box about drug use. You're talking about cheating on your taxes, right? You're talking about not paying taxes that you owe. Is that going to be a make or break issue in the election with regard to Hunter Biden? No. But I do think that it has more potential to be something that people could be interested in because it relates to taxes, it relates to money, it relates to where Hunter Biden got his money, how he was able to sustain himself, his work in Ukraine, all the things that have been brought up with regard to Joe Biden will at least, if not directly, indirectly be coming up in connection with this other case happening 2 months before the election.
And I want to bring in our investigative reporter, Olivia Rubin, because, Olivia, you were inside the courtroom when this verdict came down. What was the reaction like there as they read those words, not guilty, not guilty? I mean, excuse me, guilty, guilty, guilty.
Diana, was a stone-faced Hunter Biden. He had absolutely no reaction, essentially, when the very first guilty was announced, but that changed very quickly. He sort of appeared to accept that verdict a little bit. When the second and third not guilties were read, you know, a couple seconds later, Hunter was clearly nodding along. And then, Diane, we have talked about sort of the family dynamics of this trial, the support that Hunter has been shown during this trial. And so immediately after that verdict, that is what we saw Hunter lean on again. He hugged his attorneys, he shook the hands of his paralegals, and he went right into the gallery where his wife was waiting, where she has been every single day, and he gave her that hug and kiss that he often gives her in the courtroom. But it was also striking because compared to, you know, how this trial has played out, there have been a number of Biden family members in there every single day. The First Lady, Jill Biden, Ashley Biden, Jimmy Biden, Valerie Biden, Melissa Biden, you know, it goes on and on. But today, as the verdict was read, it was the fewest, you know, number of Biden family members that we have seen so far. It did appear that potentially some of them had missed the reading of that verdict. Valerie Biden, for example, sprinted in to the courtroom after the courtroom was unsealed, after the verdict had been read. She still had her sunglasses on, and of course she went over to where the family and friends of Hunter Biden were sitting. And then as I ran out after, Diane, the First Lady at that very moment was going into the lobby quite hastily. So, you know, not clear if they plan to not be here or if they missed the verdict, but certainly some of that Biden presence that Hunter had been leaning on throughout the entire trial was not there.
John, I want to highlight potential consequences and what happens next here, because Hunter faces up to 25 years in prison. In a second, we'll talk about how likely that actually is to happen. But our own David Muir sat down with President Biden just last week and asked the president, if his son were to be convicted, whether or not he would pardon him. I want to play that moment for you.
Your son Hunter is on trial, and I know that you cannot speak about an ongoing federal prosecution. But let me ask you, will you accept the jury's outcome, their verdict, no matter what it is?
Yes.
And have you ruled out a pardon for your son?
Yes.
You have.
So, John, that is a clear no from the president on a potential pardon for his son. The White House also says the president would not commute Hunter's sentence. Are there any other ways the president could help his son on the legal side here? And what happens if he changes his mind?
Well, you have to really consider the possibility that he will change his mind on this. And the White House, meaning the press secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre, had answered a question back in September of last year, ruling out a commutation or a pardon, but the president himself has not done that. And so, you know, it's one thing when the press secretary says something, it's another thing when the president of the United States says something himself. So we will see what happens here. We also know that President Biden had said not long ago, emphatically, that his son had done nothing wrong. So we know what the president personally feels about this conviction. He is, yes, respecting the jury's verdict. He has said that again in a statement the White House has put out today. But we know how he feels about this. We know that he feels that his son, as he has said, has done nothing wrong. So what else can he do? He could ask his attorney general to instruct the special counsel in this case to not seek a severe sentence, to not seek jail time. But that would be interfering in the investigation, interfering in the Justice Department's procedures, and he has said he's not going to do that. So I don't expect him to do that. But I think the very real question is, once we see what the actual sentence is, and frankly, once we get past the election, does that blanket statement that we heard the president say to David, that he would not pardon his son, does that hold? And more perhaps likely, the bigger question is the question of commutation. Does he really stick to what the White House said months ago and absolutely rule out a commutation for his son, even if his son is facing jail time? That would be an extraordinary decision, personal decision for the president to make.
And Nasha, of course, that all may also depend on what that sentence is. So what do you expect there? Hunter Biden faces up to 25 years in prison here, but he's a first-time nonviolent offender. What do you think?
Yeah, I really can't speculate on what the sentence will be. I'm pretty sure it will not be 25 years, but they will take these other factors into account. For example, that this wasn't used in a crime. He's not a previous offender. I think what's really most interesting to look out for right now is what might happen on appeal. On the unlawful possession charge, this is the possession for those 11 days while he was a drug addict, there is a major Second Amendment issue that he can raise on appeal. And this is based on Supreme Court precedent of interpreting the Second Amendment and saying that, you know, restrictions on gun ownership are not constitutional if you really can't find an analog to something that existed at the time of the founding. And in fact, based on this interpretation, another circuit, the Fifth Circuit, which is not binding on Delaware courts right now, that circuit actually threw out a conviction based on this exact prohibition in the context of marijuana. So, he might have a real basis to at least get that more serious charge, that unlawful gun possession, if the Supreme Court, if the Third Circuit, which he's in, and then the Supreme Court take up this case on his appeal.
Pierre, how remarkable is it that we're even here? How remarkable is this verdict, given this started as a plea agreement that ended up falling apart so publicly in court?
Well, Diane, I think that's where a lot of people on the Hunter Biden side are probably thinking. They were so close to a deal about this time last year, in which the federal prosecutor had agreed to not prosecute the gun charge. The tax cases were going to become misdemeanors. And then there were questions raised about the judge in terms of who would oversee, in terms of whether Hunter Biden would comply with, the notion that he not use drugs or be involved in any kind of other crimes. At the end of the day, they were extraordinarily close, and one might raise the question of when there was the hiccup in the initial sentencing or plea hearing, why wasn't there more effort to sort of resolve the differences at that point? Regardless, we are where we are, and I think the thing that, again, keeps jumping out at me today is the degree to which the Attorney General of the United States gave Special Counsel Weiss free rein to pursue this case in a way that he saw fit. Even today, we're not expected to hear anything from the Attorney General until Special Counsel Weiss speaks at what we believe will be around 1 o'clock to cameras. Again, extraordinary thing for the Justice Department to prosecute and convict the son of a sitting U.S. president.
All right, big thanks to Pierre Thomas and our whole team here. Do stick around because we are going to cover more on this case coming up. But right now, we're just going to take a quick break. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Whenever news breaks.
We are here in Israel, a nation at war after that brutal surprise attack by Hamas.
On the ground in Ukraine, reporting from Lewiston, Maine.
The scene of a horrific mass shooting.
ABC News Live is right there everywhere.
From the scene of that deadly missile strike in Dnipro, Ukraine. Reporting from the earthquake in Turkey.
In Rolling Fork, this tornado tore through this little town.
From the most devastating disaster in Hawaii.
From Charleston, South Carolina, on the 2024 campaign trail.
In Iceland. Let's go.
Traveling with the president in Mexico City.
Wherever the story.
From the front lines. From southern Israel.
Outside the Gaza Strip.
In Beirut.
From the FBI.
Reporting from the nurses on the picket line.
Here at 10 Downing Street in London.
Streaming live to you.
Wherever the story is.
Wherever the story is.
Wherever the story is. We're going to take you there.
You're streaming ABC News Live.
ABC News Live.
You're streaming ABC News Live.
ABC News Live. Streaming free everywhere. America's #1 streaming news.
First thing in the morning.
There's a lot going on.
We're still in a flash flood warning. To catch you up with what happened overnight. Police in riot gear arresting dozens of protesters.
What's happening today? Escalating tensions in the Middle East.
What people are talking about. The migrant crisis.
Fast, straightforward.
With some fun in between.
Check out the Gator on the 17th hole.
The buzzkill in baseball.
First thing in the morning.
America This Morning.
America's #1 early morning news.
On ABC News Live.
Why do so many people start their day here?
From ABC News, this is Start Here.
To be in the know and get a different take on the day's top stories.
A lot of news today, so let's get into it.
Listen now to the Daily News Podcast honored with 4 Edward R. Murrow Awards and see why the New York Times calls it a news podcast worth listening to. Start Here, ABC News. Make it your daily first listen.
Now, that's a part of the story I bet you didn't see coming.
Wherever you get your podcasts, Start Here.
Are you ready to celebrate? Sunday, June 30th, across the country. See, experience some of the nation's greatest pride celebrations all in one place as they happen live right here on ABC News Live. Pride across America. Celebrate joy, love, freedom, and pride. Sunday, June 30th, starting at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. Streaming on ABC News Live and stream on Hulu.
What does it take to be the most watched newscast in America?
An operation to capture ISIS fighters.
Is this our Combat Operations Center?
We're approaching the gate now. Militants came in from 4 or 5 different directions.
Operational nuclear reactor.
So you have a couple loaded and ready to go. The house is destroyed, but the flag, there's not a tear in it.
Not a tear in it.
How important is this label right here, Made in the USA? Look at your smile. You're proud of this.
I love it.
Great work.
Hi. Where are you? Where are you?
Appreciate you.
Thank you. David, good to meet you. Ismail? David.
David.
Yes, yes. I'm David Muir.
I know who you are.
You
Watch
do?
you every night.
ABC's World News Tonight with David Muir is America's most watched newscast. You're watching America's #1 streaming news, ABC News Live. Breaking news, exclusives, live reporting across the globe. Keep streaming with ABC News Live.
Hi, I'm Diane Macedo. We have breaking news. Hunter Biden is now responding after being found guilty on all counts in his felony gun trial. The jury determined the president's son knowingly lied about his drug use to a federally licensed gun dealer in 2018 and also lied on the application to buy that gun, then illegally possessed the gun for 11 days. This is the first time ever that a sitting president's child has faced criminal charges, and now the first time ever a sitting president's son has been convicted of criminal charges. Our investigative reporter, Olivia Rubin, is there outside the courthouse, along with our chief Washington correspondent, Jonathan Karl, our senior congressional correspondent, Rachel Scott, and legal contributor, former FBI agent Asha Rangappa, all joining me for more. Olivia, let's start with the latest from court and what we're hearing now from Hunter Biden.
Diane, the first reaction from Hunter Biden coming in moments ago saying he is more grateful for the support of his family than he is disappointed with the verdict. I want to read to you his brief statement verbatim. He said, "I am more grateful today for the love and support I experienced this last week from Melissa, my family, my friends, and my community than I am disappointed by the outcome. Recovery is possible by the grace of God, and I am blessed to experience that gift one day at a time." And of course, Diane, he is hinting on in that statement something that we have discussed at length throughout this trial, which is, of course, the support that he had every day in the courtroom. Some of the most high-profile members of the Biden family there in the front row, right behind him to support him day in and day out, including the First Lady, Jill Biden. At one point, you know, the supporters growing so large, I counted nearly 25 friends and family that were in the courtroom with him, taking up nearly 4 rows. So he is hitting on something that was so apparent during, you know, that trial. And I do also want to read the very brief statement of his attorney, Abby Lowell, the first reaction we are getting from him as well. He says, "We are naturally disappointed by today's verdict. We respect the jury process as we have done throughout this case. We will continue to vigorously pursue all the legal challenges available to Hunter. Through all he has been through in his recovery, including this trial, Hunter has felt grateful for and blessed by the love and support of his family." So from there, from Abby Lowell, not saying an appeal outright, but certainly hinting at it by mentioning they will pursue all legal avenues, Diane.
And Rachel, the First Family has not said much about this case throughout, but we did see, as Olivia mentioned, the First Lady there in court throughout this trial. How is the administration and the president reacting now that this conviction has come down?
Yeah, and that image of First Lady Dr. Jill Biden holding Hunter Biden's hand as they walked out of that courtroom together really underscores really how the First Family has approached this here at the White House. Yes, the president has not really said much at all when it actually comes down to this case, but what he is reiterating now that we do have this guilty verdict, he says that he supports, that he loves his son, and that he will continue to support and love his son as he considers this appeal. And he's also making it clear, Diane, that he respects the outcome of this case, that he is not questioning it at all here, even though this is a historic case where the president's son has been found guilty. You're seeing the statement here. I want to read it in part. As I said last week, I am the president, but I'm also a dad. Jill and I love our son, and we are so proud of the man that he is today. So many families who had loved ones battle addiction understand the feeling of pride, seeing someone you love come out on the other side and be so strong and resilient in recovery. The president then goes on to add, as I also said last week, I will accept the outcome of this case and will continue to respect the judicial process as Hunter considers an appeal. Jill and I will always be there for Hunter and the rest of our family with our love and support. Nothing will ever change that. So that's the first reaction coming in from the president today, right after this verdict, Diane.
John, what do you make of the historical nature of all this? The sitting president's son convicted of a crime for the first time in history just 2 weeks after the former president, for the first time in history, was convicted of a crime as well.
And we're in the midst of a presidential campaign. I mean, we have a debate coming up later this month. And so much has been censored inside courtrooms. Hunter Biden, of course, is not a candidate, but he is the son of a president. And as you just pointed out, something we have just never seen before. The child of a president prosecuted by that president's Justice Department. It's an truly extraordinary moment, and the fact that it comes so close on a trial that was not a federal trial, but a trial in New York of the man that the current president is running against in this very election. Lots of accusations back and forth about politicized justice. Certainly Republicans have been making that case, but now you have a very clear fact, which is President Biden interfere or to prevent an investigation into his son that led to a prosecution, a trial, and now a conviction of his son, even though he had expressed personally the opinion that his son had done nothing wrong. Truly, I mean, to say unprecedented doesn't begin to capture just how extraordinary this set of circumstances is.
Asha, both of these cases also spurred a lot of criticism from Trump supporters that Trump would not have faced those charges in Manhattan had he not been the former president and who he is. And now Hunter Biden supporters saying he would not have faced these charges were he not the president's son. What do you make of that on the legal side, Asha?
Well, I think there's always going to be criticisms of prosecutorial discretion and whether, certain charges should have been brought. But I think the ultimate litmus test is really what the jury decides. It is the burden on the government to prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt. And if a jury agrees and the person has broken the law, then I think a part of the rule of law is accepting the jury's verdict, whether or not it, sides with who you want. And I just want to jump on to what Jonathan mentioned about really this being an example of presidential restraint. I just want to point out also that David Weiss, the special counsel here, was a Trump-appointed U.S. attorney that President Biden kept on, even though he could have let him go, and then was appointed as a special counsel by Biden's own attorney general. Again, and Biden technically has the power to fire him or get his attorney general to fire him, which did not happen. So sort of at every stage, what we've seen, I think, is an important exercise of presidential restraint to have all these levers of power in a case that really there is a lot of incentive to be self-interested and then to not act on it.
And Rachel, President Biden is set to speak in just about an hour on gun safety, of all topics. Do you expect that he'll mention this case and this verdict in that speech? And in general, how do you expect both this and the Trump conviction to play out on the campaign trail?
Yeah, we've reached out to the White House to see if the president plans to address this in his remarks. We have not heard back. If he does, I do expect that the president will echo very similar sentiments to what he has said in his statement, that he has deep love and respect, obviously, for his son, that the family will continue to stand by him, and that he does respect the outcome of this guilty verdict that the jury did decide in this case. But the president will be delivering remarks just momentarily on gun safety. And the issue, of course, of guns directly at the center of the case of his own son, Hunter Biden. As for how this is going to play out on the campaign trail, I was just in Las Vegas with former President Donald Trump. He continued to insist that the Justice Department is being weaponized and that President Biden is using the judicial system and weaponizing it against him. Obviously, this guilty verdict of the president's own son certainly undermines that claim pretty significantly here, and it's something that we are already seeing Democrats start to point to. The Biden campaign will say that, these things are two different and two separate cases. They say that the American people will know and they will understand the difference between a guilty verdict of a private citizen, even if that private citizen is the president's son in an election year, and of course the presumptive Republican nominee, former President Donald Trump. And of course they will continue to just make the contrast very clear here that you have the president of the United States, still insisting that he respects the judicial process, the legal system, that he respects this verdict. As you hear from the former President Donald Trump in a completely different tone that he's really campaigning on at this point, this idea that he argues that the justice system is being weaponized against him, Diane.
And Olivia, obviously the ramifications of these cases on the campaign trail very different from the legal ramifications here. But you say prosecutors sort of leaned into the fact that Hunter Biden is a Biden.
Absolutely. It was referenced repeatedly, even from the very first words that prosecutors said to the jury was, no one is above the law, no matter what their name is, a direct reference to the fact that there was a Biden on trial. And that was also apparent during jury selection, where a number of jurors, in a town that the Bidens have called home and loom large here, knew the Bidens personally, knew, one potential member of the jury who was struck said that he played squash with Beau Biden. So prosecutors repeatedly went back to that in their closing statements. Again, they said no one is above the law, and they directly referenced, Diane, the members of the Biden family who were in the gallery. They pointed to the gallery and said, none of that matters, trying to make it squarely about the charges here. But certainly, when you have the First Lady of the United States as the mother of the defendant sitting front row for all of the jurors to plainly see, that is something that the prosecutors could not ignore. There were multiple times where Joe Biden's name came up. They asked Naomi Biden, oh, you refer to Pops. Who is that? Your grandfather, Joe Biden, right? Yes, she said. So, it was unavoidable that this was a member of the Biden family, and prosecutors at multiple moments sort of did lean into that fact and trying to get the jury to return that guilty verdict.
And John, a Kaiser Foundation poll says 66% of Americans say they have some experience, direct or indirect, with alcohol addiction or drug addiction. And we have seen several Republicans since former President Trump's conviction say that they were bolstered, if anything else, in their support, that their support grew stronger for him after that conviction. Could we see the same here for the president in relation to Hunter Biden? Could people look at this case and feel more sympathetic toward the first family and what they're struggling with? And could this garner more support for the president?
I mean, I think there's a big difference that would make me doubt that, and that is that President Trump, former President Trump, has made his prosecution and the allegation, the unfounded allegation that it was politically motivated, a centerpiece of his campaign. I mean, that is basically, he is telling his supporters, I'm being prosecuted because they, meaning the deep state or Democrats or whatever he takes it to mean on any given day, they really want to get you and I'm standing in the way. That is not in any way the message of President Biden. The one thing I think that the effect this could have marginally is it makes it, at least in the terms of the substance of this, it makes it harder to argue that the Justice Department is politicized and biased, against Trump. I mean, here you have the Justice Department, Joe Biden's Justice Department, prosecuting and gaining a conviction against his own son. But look, you're already hearing from Republicans saying that even though you now have the president's son convicted of 3 very serious felonies that carry the very real possibility of jail time, that this is a sham because it's a cover-up, because there are more serious crimes that the Justice Department did not pursue. So they went after this charge instead. I mean, so I don't think it's going to convince a lot of Republicans are suddenly going to wake up and say, whoa, wait a minute, I guess the justice system is even-handed. But certainly, again, in terms of the substance, this shows that on this case, President Biden did not stand in the way to protect his son. He allowed a Trump-appointed prosecutor to continue an investigation that started under the Trump presidency, allowed it to be elevated to a special counsel, and ultimately to go forward to a trial and a conviction without any interference whatsoever.
And John, on that note, Hunter Biden now faces another trial on tax charges. Yeah. That's scheduled to begin in September. How do you expect that to impact the election happening just 2 months before Election Day?
Look, actually, that is potentially the far more politically perilous trial of the two, because The allegation here, well, it's a fact. Hunter Biden didn't pay his taxes. Now he's since paid them, and he's been prosecuted for the years in which he did not pay them. But it will shine a very bright spotlight on the source of the income that he didn't pay taxes. And much of that income came from foreign sources, some of it while his father was vice president of the United States. A good chunk of it from the Ukrainian energy company Burisma. So this gets into much more potentially politically perilous territory for Joe Biden, because it will raise questions, even though that's not what the case is about, but it'll shine a spotlight on money that Hunter Biden earned from foreign sources while Joe Biden was the vice president of the United States.
All right, John Carl, Olivia Rubin, Asha Rangappa, Rachel Scott, thank you all. And do stay with us. We will have much more coverage of Hunter Biden's guilty verdict right after the break. Keep it here.
Whenever news breaks,
We are here in Israel, a nation at war.
In Rolling Fork, this tornado tore through this town.
From Lewiston, Maine.
The scene of a horrific mass shooting.
From the scene of that deadly missile strike.
ABC News Live everywhere.
In Iceland. Let's go.
On the 2024 campaign trail.
Here at 10 Downing Street.
Wherever the story is.
We're going to take you there.
You're streaming ABC News Live.
ABC News Live.
You're streaming ABC News Live.
ABC News Live, streaming free everywhere. Now streaming on Hulu.
I'm a rock and roll star. I'm not a saint. I'm John Bon Jovi.
John Bon Jovi, the new special, what you have not yet seen. John Bon Jovi with Michael Strahan. Now streaming on Hulu.
Give it to me. Give it to me.
Why do so many people start their day here?
From ABC News, this is Start Here.
To be in the know and get a different take on the day's top stories.
A lot of news today, so let's get into it.
Listen now to the Daily News Podcast honored with 4 Edward R. Murrow Awards and see why the New York Times calls it a news podcast worth listening to. Start Here, ABC News. Make it your daily first listen.
Now, that's a part of the story I bet you didn't see coming.
Wherever you get your podcasts, Start Here.
Let's go.
The ship is incredible. It feels like living in a science fiction movie.
We just saw what no one has seen before.
Wow, look at that.
Oh my gosh.
Well, dead ahead. Turn on!
We are heading into the unknown.
Hammer, hammer, hammer.
It doesn't get any more cutting edge than this.
Hi, I'm Andy. And I'm Sabrina. And we're moms, juggling tons of stuff every day, like all you moms out there. And you know what we love? Really love? Pop culture. So what happens when being obsessed with pop culture collides with being a mom? You get us. So listen now to our new podcast, Pop Culture Moms, wherever you get your podcasts.
Are you ready to celebrate? Sunday, June 30th, across the country. See, experience some of the nation's greatest pride celebrations all in one place as they happen live right here on ABC News Live. Pride across America. Celebrate joy, love, freedom, and pride. Sunday, June 30th, starting at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. Streaming on ABC News Live and stream on Hulu.
I'm Jacqueline Lee here in Arizona on the front lines of the abortion battle. Wherever the story is, we'll take you there. You're streaming ABC News Live.
Hi, I'm Di Macedo. We have breaking news at any moment. Special counsel David Weiss is expected to give a statement after a jury found Hunter Biden guilty on all counts in his felony gun trial. The jury determined the president's son knowingly lied about his drug use to a federally licensed gun dealer in 2018 and also lied on the application to buy that gun, then illegally possessed the gun for 11 days. That marks the first time ever a sitting president's son has faced and been convicted of criminal charges. Investigative reporter Olivia Rubin was in the courtroom when that verdict was and I'm also joined by ABC News legal contributor, former FBI agent Asha Rangappa. Olivia, Hunter Biden and his lead attorney just released a statement saying they're disappointed with this verdict. What's the latest from court?
They did, Diane, but critically, Hunter Biden saying he is more appreciative of his family and friends' support than he is disappointed by that verdict. And again, you know, we have talked about it extensively, Diane, but just the sheer show of support from some of the highest profile members of the Biden family. The First Lady, Jill Biden, Ashley Biden, the president's siblings, Jimmy and Valerie Biden, all in the courtroom at various times to show their support for Hunter. And that is exactly what Hunter, you know, references in his statement. And it's exactly what he turned to when that verdict was read. You know, he immediately, after hugging his attorneys and the paralegals, went into the gallery away from the defense table so he could grab onto his wife, who was sitting right behind him every single day of this trial. But Jill Biden, Diane, noticeably not in the courtroom when the verdict was read. As I was running out of the courthouse, you know, to come and talk to you all after the reading of the verdict, Jill was passing me going inside quite hastily. Members of her security team appearing to be rushing. So it is not clear if she missed that verdict, if they didn't wait for her, but she certainly was not there in that moment, though she had been there for most of the trial, Diane.
Asha, what do you make of the timing of this verdict? Just 3 hours and 5 minutes of deliberations.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that they had a lot to really debate on. This is really whether Hunter Biden knew that he was an addict and said otherwise when he signed the form, and also was, in fact, a drug user during this 11-day window when he was possessing a firearm. So the factual issues that the jury had to determine were pretty straightforward. And, you know, it's maybe even a little bit more interesting that it took even as long as it did, which maybe there might have been a couple of holdouts who needed a little persuasion. But otherwise, I think it was a generally straightforward case as far as the legal issues that were involved.
And Olivia, less than 2 weeks ago, you were outside the courtroom, just like you are now, when former President Trump was convicted in that historic trial. First time a former president faced or was convicted on criminal charges. And now there you are outside the court in Wilmington, Delaware, where for the first time ever, a sitting president's son is convicted of criminal charges. What is the conversation around the historic nature of all of this?
Well, it's certainly, as you said, historic each and every time and for its own reasons. You know, Donald Trump, of course, a former president, a current candidate for office in 2024, and sort of the sheer, I would say, nature of his stature was on display in that courthouse every single day. There is no other time when you go into a courthouse and get double screening procedures, officers lining the courtroom, a Secret Service in the courtroom for Donald Trump. So just this sheer sort of security of it was a reminder day in and day out of just how, you know, unprecedented and the historic nature of it. And at this courthouse, too, Secret Service inside of the courtroom, a reminder of the high-profile individuals that for the first time in our history are being walked into those courtrooms to stand trial. And it is something certainly that the jury saw, Diane. And, you know, we don't know how it plays into their decisions, but to have someone like Donald Trump and Hunter Biden, people who the jury certainly knows, sitting in a courtroom full of, you know, in Trump's case, at least armed guards, is certainly out of the norm of a criminal trial. So fascinating on how, you know, that could have played into the jury's minds of it all.
Asha, both cases from different sides also spurred criticism that these men would not have faced these charges if they weren't who they were. What do you make of how Hunter Biden's trial came about, particularly the fact that this all started with a plea deal that so publicly fell apart in court?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a little bit of a difference between the two cases. The Manhattan case was unique because the factual scenario there was incredibly unique. I don't think you would ever find another case with exactly those facts and then be able to compare. And that's why, you know, to some degree, that was a novel legal theory. I think in Hunter Biden's case, this, you know, I don't think it would be unusual to find this set of facts, and yet you don't typically see a prosecution for merely filling out the form wrong with, you know, while being a drug user, unless the gun was also used in another felony or used in a violent crime. This is not typically the kind of thing that would be prosecuted. However, at the end of the day, if these are violations of the law, then the jury would, has a legitimate case to consider, and they did in both of them.
So, Olivia, what happens next now? What are you watching for in terms of sentencing? Because Hunter Biden faces up to 25 years in prison, but he is a first-time nonviolent offender. So what are you watching for there?
And specifically, there was nothing ever done with that gun, Diane. It was something that his attorneys leaned in on with some of the investigators in this case, saying, there's no evidence that that gun was ever shot, no evidence that that gun was ever used, and they did confirm that. But moving forward, first and foremost, the parties are going to need to set a sentencing date. The judge in the case said that that is typically about 120 days, but they did not set it in the courtroom. Instead, she said that they would privately confer and be in contact in order to set that sentencing date. But you'd have to expect that, additionally, on top of him being a nonviolent offender, Hunter has expressed remorse for his crime. He has done certain other things that could play into him not getting any jail time. But what I'm really waiting to see is exactly what prosecutors request. Do they go in there, Diane, and request that Hunter Biden serves jail time? It's not necessarily that the judge will follow what their request is, but it will certainly be striking to see what they go in there and seek for Hunter Biden now that they have secured his conviction.
And Asha, anytime we have a conviction, we look out for potential appeal. And you say this one could get interesting. Why?
Well, this is happening against a backdrop of the Supreme Court interpreting the Second Amendment very broadly, using this very originalist interpretation, and, reconsidering whether prohibitions that did not exist at the time of the founding are constitutional today. And I think Hunter Biden has a very strong case that, the particular prohibition in this case for, people who are using drugs would not have existed or have no analog at the time of the founding. So it will really be interesting to see how that particular Second Amendment argument fares on appeal.
Does that mean you think this case can make it all the way to the Supreme Court?
I think it could, because his appeal will go to the Third Circuit Court of Appeals. Now, if they disagree and say, no, this law is constitutional, what happens is that there will be what's called a circuit split, because the Fifth Circuit has actually interpreted this prohibition involving, drug restrictions based on drugs in the opposite direction. That is the kind of case that the Supreme Court would take up and rule on. So I think it would have a very good choice if he didn't win to get to the Supreme Court, or if he prevails, that would end it right there for him.
All right, Olivia Rubin, Asha Rangappa, thank you both. And again, Special Counsel David Weiss is expected to give a statement at any moment. Do stay with us. We will bring you more coverage of Hunter Biden's guilty verdict right after the break.
Whenever news breaks,
We are here in Israel, a nation at war.
In Rolling Fork, this tornado tore through this town.
From Lewiston, Maine.
The scene of a horrific mass shooting. From the scene of that deadly missile strike.
ABC News Live everywhere.
In Iceland, let's go.
On the 2024 campaign trail.
Here at 10 Downing Street.
Wherever the story is.
We're going to take you there.
You're streaming
ABC News Live.
ABC News Live.
You're streaming ABC News Live.
ABC News Live, streaming free everywhere. Now streaming on Hulu.
I'm a rock and roll star. I'm not a saint. I'm John Bon Jovi.
John Bon Jovi, the new special, what you have not yet seen. John Bon Jovi with Michael Strahan. Now streaming on Hulu.
What's good to watch, read? Where can I get a great deal on what I'm just dying to buy? Oh, it's all right here. GMA Life. Get the latest celebrity buzz, deals and steals, and the coolest lifestyle tips from GMA.
I love that so much.
Streaming weekends on ABC News Live.
Why do so many people start their day here?
From ABC News, this is Start Here.
To be in the know and get a different take on the day's top stories.
A lot of news today, so let's get into it.
Listen now to the Daily News Podcast honored with 4 Edward R. Murrow Awards and see why the New York Times calls it a news podcast worth listening to. Start Here, ABC News. Make it your daily first listen.
Now, that's a part of the story I bet you didn't see coming.
Wherever you get your podcasts, Start Here.
It's lunchtime in America, so what are we serving up?
Well, how about everything you need to know?
That sounds pretty good.
Your health, your money, breaking news, music, and of course, good food. A third hour of GMA in the afternoon.
So join us after news.
For everything you need to know. I love that.
Reporting from Monterey Park, California, I'm Robin Roberts. Wherever the story is, we're going to take you there. You're streaming ABC News live.
Are you ready to celebrate? Sunday, June 30th, across the country. See, experience some of the nation's greatest pride celebrations all in one place as they happen live right here on ABC News Live. Pride across America. Celebrate joy, love, freedom, and pride. Sunday, June 30th, starting at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. Streaming on ABC News Live and stream on Hulu.
What does it take to be the most watched newscast in America?
We are part of an operation.
Is this our combat operations center?
We're approaching the gate. Militants came in from different directions. Nuclear reactor. So you have a couple loaded and ready to go. The house is destroyed, but the flag...
Not a carry in it.
How important it made the USA. Great work.
Hi, appreciate you.
Thank you.
Ismail? David.
I'm David Muir.
I know you are.
You
Watch
do?
you every night.
ABC's World News Tonight with David Muir is America's most watched newscast.
Here's to Good Mornings in America.
Can you feel the love?
Oh, yeah.
Mornings that inspire, filled with hope, kindness, joyous surprises, and so much fun.
This is crazy. This is absolutely crazy.
Start your day with Good Morning America's Ray of Sunshine, highlighting the best of America and helping
Make dreams come true.
Wow. I'm just so happy. It's so good.
get ready to smile and put the good into your morning, America, because
You know what will make the morning better? A little ray of sunshine.
All right. Breaking news, and first on ABC News Live, Hunter Biden guilty on all counts in his federal gun case. The verdict, a historic first for the son of a sitting president. How long Hunter Biden will spend behind bars. Dramatic new footage showing Israeli hostages rescued in Gaza. The new details from the operation and the new boost for a ceasefire deal. And disorder in the court during Young Thug's racketeering trial, why the rapper's lawyer was held in contempt and arrested in the courtroom. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kira Phillips. Our top story, only 3 hours of deliberations and guilty on all 3 counts. A federal jury convicting Hunter Biden in his federal gun trial. The president's son charged with illegally purchasing and possessing a gun while being addicted to drugs. This conviction marking the first time a president's child has been found guilty of a crime while their father was in office. Hunter Biden could now face up to 25 years in prison and a fine of up to $750,000. Our investigative reporter, Olivia Rubin, is outside court. Also, our senior congressional correspondent, Rachel Scott, joins us from the White House. Chief Justice correspondent Pierre Thomas is also with us, along with our legal contributor, Brian Buckmeyer. Rachel, let's start with you. You know, it was just last week that David Muir spoke with President Biden about possibly pardoning his son. Let's take a listen to that.
Your son Hunter is on trial, and I know that you cannot speak about an ongoing federal prosecution. But let me ask you, will you accept the jury's outcome, their verdict, no matter what it is?
Yes.
And have you ruled out a pardon for your son?
Yes.
You have.
So, do we have a reaction from the president today as the verdict was read?
Yeah, the president did react not too long ago as this historic verdict was read, the guilty verdict of his son, Hunter Biden. And he continued to express support for his son, Hunter. This is his only surviving son. He's very close to his son, Hunter, and has been throughout this entire process. President Biden has been clear he doesn't want to comment on the ongoing federal case here. But as you can see up on your screen, the president said, as I said last week, I'm the president, but I'm also a dad. Jill and I love our son, and we are so proud of the man man he is today. So many families who have loved ones that have suffered with abuse know the realities of this. He goes on to say, as I also said last week, I will accept the outcome of this case and will continue to respect the judicial process, something that he made clear to our own David Muir just days ago, Kira. So look, from the White House here, the First Lady has been adamant about attending this trial, going in person, even if that meant flying to France, flying back on the day that Naomi Biden was testifying inside that courtroom, only to turn right back around and then fly to Paris right again. They are standing by their son during this time, even as it reaches this guilty verdict of their son, Hunter Biden, but also expressing respect for the judicial system and the legal process that played out here, Kira.
So Brian, since Hunter is a first-time offender here, it's not likely he'll be sentenced to the full 25 years in jail. So let's be honest here. What do you see the sentencing for Hunter to actually be?
Yeah. Well, first, I would say that a good sign for not serving jail time is the fact that after being convicted, Hunter Biden walked out of the courtroom. There are multiple situations where you have someone who is convicted and the government or the prosecutor says, you know what, Your Honor, now that this individual is facing a potential jail time, we want to remand them, basically hold them in custody until a sentencing date. The fact that that didn't happen very much leans in Hunter Biden's favor. Now, we do talk about the 25 years, and that's because count 1 and 2 have a maximum of 10 years and count 3 has a maximum of 5. But there's no mandatory minimum. And so after all arguments are made and the federal guidelines are used to find out where Hunter Biden should get a general range of prison sentence, you'll hear arguments to mitigation as to why he should serve no jail time. And so there's a possibility he doesn't serve any time at all.
So, Olivia, you're straight out of the courtroom as that verdict was reached. What was Hunter's reaction?
Well, at first, stone-faced, Kira, he had no reaction when the first guilty was uttered into the courtroom, but that did change very quickly, and he ultimately, appeared to accept that verdict when they said guilty for the second and third times. Hunter was nodding his head, and then, Kira, no surprise, but he immediately started turning to those around him, hugging his attorney, hugging the paralegal, and then he left the gallery, he left the defense table into the gallery where his wife was waiting for him, as she has been every single day of that trial. They often walk in and out of the specific courtroom holding hands, hugging, kissing each other, really a show of support by the Biden family. But digging deeper into, that actual verdict, Kira, and how the jury came to that decision ultimately, 3 hours over 2 days. Our Terry Moran just sat down with one of those jurors who offered some perspective inside of the deliberation room. I think we can take a listen.
What was the most important evidence for you to get to conviction?
I guess when Hunter went to buy the gun and the boxes that he checked off, and I don't see how he could know that he was not. Are you? And that's the specific thing you were saying. Are you a known drug addict, addicted to drugs, or an addict? Well, you think about if you're addicted to drugs, or are you an addict? If you're an addict, you're an addict.
You heard it there, Kira. If you're an addict, you're an addict. That is what one of the jurors just told our Terry Moran.
So, Pierre, this isn't the end of Hunter Biden's legal troubles either. I mean, he still faces those tax charges.
Indeed, he's got a case coming up this fall. Felony tax charges is what he's facing. And Special Counsel Weiss, by all accounts, will pursue that as vigorously as he pursued this gun charge. And Kara, I will say that, DOJ has been, watching this case very closely. They've not tried to micromanage it. Weiss had full range freedom to pursue this case in the way he chose to do so, or the way he saw fit. That he is appointed by former President Trump, a U.S. attorney appointed by former President Trump. Merrick Garland, the Attorney General, allowed him to investigate this case. When the plea deal fell through, he then allowed him to continue to pursue the case as a special counsel. And I think they won't say it out loud, but DOJ has the perspective today that this proves what Merrick Garland has been saying over and over again, that they pursue the facts and the law wherever they take them, even when it involves the son of a sitting president of the United States.
So, Brian, if Hunter Biden's attorneys file an appeal, what's the likelihood that the judge would consider it?
I think the judge would have to consider it, not just based on the evidence of this case, but I would remind everyone that this is a case about whether or not an addict or a user of drugs can possess a firearm. Currently within the Supreme Court, and I think this Thursday and Friday, we're supposed to get 4 decisions on each day. There's this case called U.S. v. Rahimi, where an individual is making the argument that because they had a domestic violence conviction, they should not be barred from possessing a firearm. It goes back to a case that the Supreme Court decided some years ago about extra requirements of using your Second Amendment right. So I think he has a lot of constitutional and even legal arguments to make in this case.
So, Rachel, the White House also had said the president would not commute his son's sentence. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, not commuting. And the president also said, he told our David Muir that he would not pardon his son Hunter Biden either. And look, I mean, obviously we are in an election year, and the Biden campaign will make the point that they believe that American voters will see these two things very differently, that there is a difference between a private citizen, even though he is the son of the president of the United States, running for re-election, being convicted on these charges, and a difference between the former president and presumptive Republican nominee being found guilty on those 34 counts of falsifying business records in that hush money case there in New York City. And so we hear the former president. Look here, I was just out in Las Vegas just yesterday and Sunday with the former president holding his campaign rally, his first since his conviction. And he tried to make this argument that the justice system is being weaponized against him. Democrats very quick to point out in the aftermath of this guilty verdict of Hunter Biden that completely undermines the argument that the former president and many Republicans are making, something the president has called dangerous himself. Kira.
So, Pierre, this historic conviction comes in the face of former President Trump's baseless claims that President Biden is responsible for his own criminal conviction. I'm looking through a Trump campaign statement right now on the Hunter Biden verdict right now. I'm curious, what does this conviction from the Justice Department of Hunter Biden do to those claims from Trump now, you think?
Well, DOJ would maintain that they are not engaged in politics, but that's the world we're living in, especially with a presidential campaign fully engaged and underway. I would say, based on my conversations with Justice Department officials, they took on the notion of pursuing a prosecution of the president's son, who's in office. The president is, the chief executive. The people, in a technical sense, at the Justice Department work for him. And what they assiduously did and said is that they were pursuing this case without interference of the White House, and that the Attorney General would not interfere with, again, a U.S. appointed attorney appointed by Donald Trump, that they would not affect this case, and that justice would be metered out in a way that's fair and impartial, that DOJ, this Attorney General, who was appointed by Biden, would not put his finger on the scale to tip the scale in favor of Joe Biden's son.
At the end of the day, Olivia, we talk so much about Hunter Biden's memoir and how it kept coming up. And there were even parts of his memoir where he's very transparent and very open about the mistakes that he's made in his life, but also his redemption, as he refers to it as. Besides the fact that his book, by the way, has skyrocketed in sales over the last few weeks, how much do you think that memoir kind of came back to bite him a little bit during all this?
Likely very heavily. Prosecutors played over an hour of excerpts worth of Hunter Biden reading that book and reading into the record for the jurors to hear in Hunter Biden's own words about his addiction. And every single time, essentially, Hunter's attorney, Abby Lowell, tried to counter one of the prosecutor's narratives, some of the evidence they were putting in, they would go right back to the excerpts from his book and say, don't believe us, believe Hunter Biden. And in their closing arguments, Kira, prosecutors said, you know, it was Hunter who chose to write this book and document his struggles. And Hunter nodded along. He took sort of accountability and ownership of the fact that he did write this book, and he didn't, you know, seem, you know, ashamed or embarrassed by it. But it was also, Kira, one of the most sort of painful and vulnerable moments of this trial. It was when those excerpts were played that Hunter's sister, the daughter of President Joe Biden, was crying from one of the benches as, you know, she recounted in Hunter's own words some of the most dark and dangerous and troubled times during his addictions, when he said he was in full-blown addiction, smoking crack every 15 minutes, and detailing sort of how grim that was and what that looked like in his life. And it brought her to tears multiple times. So, you know, it was sort of one of the swords that prosecutors had in this trial. And it was also something, you know, that Hunter Biden's family had to suffer through.
And Rachel, just a little tidbit that we were learning about, and I don't know. Oh, okay. Let's actually, we're going to go straight to the mics. You can see David Weiss, special counsel, about to give a briefing. Let's listen in.
I'm special counsel. Earlier today, Hunter Biden was convicted of 2 counts of lying on a form submitted to a federal firearms dealer about his addiction or use of crack cocaine, and possessing a firearm while a user or addict. There have been 2 overarching themes emphasized by the prosecution during trial: this defendant's illegal choices and the rule of law. First, while there has been much testimony about the defendant's abuse of drugs and alcohol, ultimately, this case was not just about addiction, a disease that haunts families across the United States, including Hunter Biden's family. This case was about the illegal choices defendant made while in the throes of addiction, his choice to lie on a government form when he bought a gun, and the choice to then possess that gun. It was these choices and the combination of guns and drugs that made his conduct dangerous. Second, no one in this country is above the law. Everyone must be accountable for their actions, even this defendant. However, Hunter Biden should be no more accountable than any other citizen convicted of this same conduct. The prosecution has been and will continue to be committed to this principle and to the principles of federal prosecution in carrying out its responsibilities. I want to thank the jury for their service. There are few civic responsibilities more important than jury service. 15 Delawareans came to court each day and performed their responsibilities in a professional and conscientious manner. We thank them. I want to thank Derek Hines, Leo Wise, and the entire special counsel team. I am so proud of this group of attorneys, agents, and litigation professionals. This is a difficult assignment. These folks have been working 7 days a week for the last couple months, litigating a variety of issues in district and appellate courts on 2 coasts. They have given their heart and soul to this work. They represent the best that public service has to offer. I am incredibly grateful. Finally, I want to thank Attorney General Garland for providing the support necessary to fulfill our mission, ensuring that we have the independence to appropriately pursue our investigations and prosecutions. As you know, we have additional trials and investigative work to be done, so I will not entertain questions at this time. Our work continues. Thank you for your consideration. Thanks.
We've heard from jurors on Mr. Weiss, would you entertain a plea deal in the California case? I'm a witness to Joe Biden being a criminal on Air Force One, Air Force Two. I need to be a...
All right, short and sweet. Special counsel David Weiss there giving quick remarks, saying this was not just about addiction. It was about illegal choices. It was about guns and drugs and conduct period. No one in this country is above the law, something that we have said time and time again as we've been talking about this trial. So, Rachel, your reaction first to, because there was a lot of talk about too much talk about drug addiction, and there was a lot of concern around the country that this would come off insensitive, that those dealing with drug addiction were concerned that this was going to become the center of the case, where special counsel, again, driving home to the point that that's not what this was about. This necessarily was not all about drug addiction, but that it was about bad choices.
Yeah, absolutely, Kira. And I think you're really hitting the nail on the head here by making that point, because it's something that the special counsel clearly wanted to drive home in these very brief remarks, saying that it wasn't just necessarily all about here addiction, it's also about unlawful conduct. And this is why they pursued this case against Hunter Biden. He also said that Hunter Biden is no more accountable than any other private citizen in this country, underscoring the rule of law. He praised the 15 Americans from Delaware that came forward to be part of this jury that deliberated and ultimately found Hunter Biden guilty on these charges. And it was also very notable that he thanked Biden's Attorney General, Merrick Garland, for his support to pursue these investigations. He said for the independents to pursue these investigations, underscoring here, again, the sharp contrast that we've heard Republicans sort of make, this idea that they believe that the Justice Department is being weaponized. Here you have the special counsel praising Biden's own Attorney General for giving him the space and the time to pursue this investigation and this case against the president's son, Kira.
Pierre, what more do we know about David Weiss? You know, he took a lot of heat because he was nominated by then President Donald Trump back in 2017, but he seemed very direct, to the point, by the law.
Well, Kira, I think one of the things that strikes you when you see a U.S. attorney, in this case a special counsel, come out and speak after they have a conviction is the extraordinary power and resources that they can bring to bear on an individual. And, you know, listening to him talk, Hunter Biden was pursued vigorously, and no matter what the circumstances were, when they looked at the case and saw his signature on that form, and given all the evidence they say they had, that he was a known drug user who was deep in the throes of addiction, in terms of crack addiction, that when he filled out that form and said that he was not such, that he had committed a crime, and then when he was in possession of the gun, he was had committed a crime as well. So at the end of the day, when you see the judicial and law enforcement process at work, and you hear the tone and the sound of David Weiss, he absolutely believes that they did the right thing today in getting this conviction. And I also think it was interesting that he went out of his way to point out that Merrick Garland, who was appointed by President Biden, gave him the free rein and the independence and the authority to pursue this case the way he saw fit.
Olivia, I was drawn to the video we just saw a moment ago where we saw Hunter Biden and his wife and Jill Biden, all three of them hand in hand, walking out of the courtroom. Here are those images once again. You know, Jill Biden played a big part in this courtroom by just being present, flying to France, coming back, you know, getting emotional, in tears. Just your thoughts and what the talk and the reaction was to her presence and her reaction, and just how she truly seemed, you know, to be playing a pretty vital role in supporting Hunter Biden through all this.
Well, that image is so striking, Kira, because that is exactly how we saw Hunter Biden inside of the courthouse, where there are no cameras. He would come back from breaks in the day holding his mother's hand at times, holding his wife's hand, kissing his wife, getting up to lean over the barrier that separates the defense table from the first row to talk with his mother, to hug his wife again, to hug supporters. So, you know, just how you were seeing them, and I'm looking at the monitor down here, leave the courtroom holding hands, that is how we saw them quite often inside. And you are correct, Jill Biden was there day in and day out, all except, I believe, for one of those days. So really a support system for Hunter. You know, it's interesting. Ashley Biden got quite emotional at times. She was crying. She would console her mother. They would put their arms around each other. Really a family affair, though. You know, I find it fascinating if Jill ever got personally emotional. You know, there was one day after a quite painful day where she left the courtroom with sunglasses on, putting them on before she left the room, potentially trying to hide if she had gotten emotional. But certainly her presence was something that the jurors saw. It was something that the prosecutors pointed out to jurors. Potentially they could have been nervous about the effect of Jill Biden's presence in the courtroom. And so prosecutor David Weiss began his closing argument by pointing at the gallery and by saying, you know, you may recognize them from the community, you may recognize them from the news, but, you know, none of that matters in this trial. They are not part of the evidence, urging the jury not to take into consideration members of the first family that were in that courtroom nearly every single day.
Brian, just taking a look at one of the jurors, an African-American woman, age 51, lives in Upper Delaware. We got some notes from one of our reporters there just outside court. This juror saying, I think he talking about Hunter Biden here, I just think he needs help. He needs rehab. In my opinion, this is a waste of taxpayers' dollars. They should just have fined him. She made comments about the jury. We were not divided. We worked together really well, considering who his father is and the political climate in this country. It turned out better than I expected. There was no fighting in the jury room. She went on to talk about the key evidence here, the text messages. That's the key evidence, because it did show, in my opinion, that he was trying to get drugs. It's just interesting to sort of read insight here from the jurors as we start to get interviews and also just conversations and notes from what they are starting to say. She also went on to say that Hunter looked kind of defeated. He looked kind of helpless. I think he needs to get into rehab if he hasn't done it. So that's sort of interesting, because we really don't know what Hunter's life is like in the moment. If he continues on if he does his meetings every week, you know, do we have any more insight to what his daily life is like? It's just interesting to hear just this juror's thought, not just talking as a juror, but kind of like a mom, too, on what she hopes that he's doing with his life personally.
Yeah, it is interesting. I guess the defense attorney in me, my ears kind of perk up, and I start thinking, okay, the client has been convicted. Are there potential appellate issues here? One of the major ones would go and interview the jurors, or simply just listen to ABC as to how they're portraying what jurors are saying. Considering the punishment, not something a juror should do. Thinking like a mother, as you pointed out, very nice, but also another thing jurors shouldn't do. And nothing in that statement that she said, especially when she focuses on the text messages, suggests to me that she believed in a lie. It suggests to me that she says, okay, he was looking to get drugs, but that's not a part of the crime here. The crimes are, did he lie to the firearm dealer? Did he lie on the document? And did he unlawfully possess the firearm as an addict or a user? And so I think what we're going to hear is a lot of defense attorneys questioning some of these jurors, especially those open to speaking to attorneys in the media, and trying to figure out what really went into their decision and whether or not there were proper or improper inferences.
One interesting note here, the juror was asked about First Lady Jill Biden and what asked her what she thought of the First Lady's presence, and she said, no, didn't think much of it. I noticed her and her hair, but that didn't seem to have an impact. Rachel, one more question to you, if you don't mind. Now that this well, we've got the verdict. How do you think this will impact, if at all, moving forward towards November and his father's attempt at another 4 years in the White House?
Yeah, and just remarkable what you just read there, Kira, because imagine just being a juror sitting in that box and seeing the First Lady of the United States also there. Please excuse a little bit of the noise behind me. Obviously, the Marine Corps band playing out here on the North Lawn. Your question about how this is going to impact the campaign. Biden campaign officials continue to insist that voters will see some sort of separation here between these two cases, between former President Donald Trump and the president's son, Hunter Biden, arguing that Hunter Biden is a private citizen, even though he is obviously the president's son, and that former President Donald Trump is the presumptive Republican nominee. And then also, there's just two different ways that former President Donald Trump and President Biden are treating and talking about the judicial system and the legal system in this country. We've heard former President Donald Trump continue to make these accusations that the Justice Department is being weaponized against him. And then you hear President Biden in that very sharp contrast, saying that the rule of law should be respected, and so should this verdict, even when it comes down to the guilty verdict of his own son, Kira.
Rachel, I love how you didn't even flinch. The music, of course, is in preparation for the president's speech that he's going to give on gun safety. It was a previously scheduled event, but it is a bit ironic after his son is found guilty on gun charges. I know you're going to be at that event. We are going to take it live as soon as it happens. Olivia, Brian, Pierre, Rachel, thank you all so much. Just rolling through all of that with me. Really appreciate it. And of course, the news never stops, and neither do we. We're going to be right back after a quick break. More news on the other side.